Thanks, Christine. And thanks, everybody, for that warm welcome. It's good to see a lot of you stuck it out here to the end of the day. This is great. I will say thanks, sort of, for mentioning where I went to school, because both UVA and Carolina took it on the chin in the NCAA tournament, bringing it back to our sports theme. Carolina, in particular, for those of you who didn't follow, they lost in the final game to Villanova on a last-minute three-pointer. So that was kind of crushing. Although I'm sure Adam, who we found out went to Duke, was jumping up and down on his couch. For those of you who don't know, Carolina and Duke have a big rivalry. But I'm not going to say anything bad about Duke. I know we've got our happy fun and games a couple hours coming up afterwards, and I don't need to turn that into some kind of steel cage death match with the judo guy. I don't need to go toe-to-toe with the guy who's been training in Japan for 4 years against Olympic athletes. That's fine. I win. You win. I submit. I tap out, whatever the right judo phrase is. That might, I think that gets me a little bit outside of my comfort zone, like Brent Jones was talking about earlier this morning. You know, it's funny, when he mentioned that about being outside your comfort zone, you know, it really is important for marketers to get outside their comfort zone. We talked a lot about, you know, today I've heard a lot of people talking about, you know, we want to look at the waterfall to try and understand what's working and what's not working. We want to get rid of the bad stuff. And you have to be really careful about refining just on the stuff that's worked historically. You know, you need to continue to experiment, need to continue to introduce new things into the mix. Otherwise, it's going to be a bad situation for you. So you do need to get out of your comfort zone a little bit. And it was funny when he mentioned that, because I've got something coming up that I'm going to be getting out of my comfort zone a little bit. In September, I'm going to take a crack at swimming the English Channel. And, well, I haven't done it yet. Don't cheer. And so I think that, you know, that whole thing is going to be, you know, a little bit outside my comfort zone. But it's funny, because last week I actually had a few days off, had a little bit of a vacation, and I was in Cancun, which was nice, and went for a long swim in the ocean while I was there. And I was thinking, oh, you know what, I've got this San Francisco trip coming up next week. And you know, I'm going to be here all week. Tip your waitresses. And hey, maybe I can go for a swim in the bay. That would be awesome. Well, the temperature in Cancun of the water is about 75, 80 degrees. So I looked it up online. What's the temperature here? Because I'm from Boston, so I flew out over the weekend. It's about 57 degrees here in the bay, which actually is about the water temperature in the English Channel. So if later this week you're down by the aquatic park and you see some guy go charging into the water and then squealing like an 8-year-old girl and running back out, that's me. So you'll know who that is. All right, we didn't come here to talk about my idiotic athletic endeavors. We want to talk about the demand waterfall. So let's get into that. So what we're going to talk about today is the demand waterfall and how you can apply that 4 different ways to really advance what you're doing from a marketing and a sales and marketing perspective, really. So what I want to start with is a little bit of an introduction to the SiriusDecisions demand waterfall. And before I get into that, I want to talk about this thing we call the lead management process. And for a lot of us, it's this really vague, weird thing that happens. You know, we've got these inquiries that are coming in at the top of the waterfall. Some weird black voodoo magic happens somewhere in the middle, and then out the other end comes closed-won deals magically. And for those of us that have started to try and bring a little bit of visibility and transparency into what that looks like inside, we've got this insane, the first look at it tends to be this crazy Rube Goldberg, unnecessarily complicated set of interconnected processes that now we have to try and untangle. You know, and sometimes our first reaction is, no, cover it up again. Go back to the black box. I prefer the black box. But we're going to talk a little bit about getting inside this black box and trying to understand what's happening, because this is a common theme I've heard in the breakout sessions and the main stage stuff here. Bringing that visibility and that transparency is so important to improving what we're doing from a marketing perspective. So let's take a look at the SiriusDecisions demand waterfall. Now, I have to tell you, when Sirius first released this version of the waterfall, I was sitting in the audience as a practitioner like you at Summit, and I was just shaking my head thinking, oh my God, this thing is so complicated. Are you kidding me? Can we go back to the original 5-stage waterfall? That's much simpler. But you know, this is actually, it's a great model. It's not for everybody. I've seen some applications of it in some of the breakout sessions today where they've gone back to the simpler model, and that's fine. The nice thing about this model, though, is it accounts for some of the complexity that a lot of organizations run into. So I want to share that with you quickly because it helps set up what we're going to talk about for the rest of the session. So at the top of the waterfall, we have inquiries coming in. These can be coming in from an inbound or from an outbound perspective. And then those inquiries are going to get qualified. So in the new version of the waterfall, we're running them through an automation qualification process. And this is what marketing does. By the way, the legend on this, the red boxes, are the things that marketing does. The green boxes are handoffs or transition points, okay? So marketing is going to take these inquiries, and they're going to produce AQLs. It's going to go through some sort of lead scoring process, and they're going to pass it off to the teleteam. Okay, now this is assuming you have a teleteam. Again, this is allowing for sort of all different situations. So let's assume you've got a teleteam. And so that teleteam now is going to accept those as tele-accepted leads, TALs, and they're going to qualify the leads. Now they're going to turn them into TQLs, tele-qualified leads. But what this model takes into account is the fact that the teleteam can source some of their own leads. They're not just reliant on what marketing feeds them. So that's what we see in the orange box, and these are the tele-generated leads. So the next step is the teleteam is going to take both types of leads, the ones they inherited from marketing and qualified and the ones they source themselves. They're going to pass them to the outside sales team. And so the sales team is going to now take these, and they're going to do their own level of qualification. But this also recognizes that the outside sales team sources their own leads too. So that's what we see in the blue box. So they're going to take the sales-generated leads. They're going to take the sales-accepted leads that came from higher up in the waterfall, and they're going to qualify those and turn those into SQLs. Now, there's one line kind of coming around the right side of the waterfall here, and that's where it goes directly from marketing as an AQL right to the outside sales team. These are the hot leads. These are what we call route-arounds. Okay, so these are the ones you want to get them right in the hands of the sales team. You don't want to put it through the tele-process. You've got to keep these things moving. So that's what that accounts for. And then finally, the sales team is going to take the combination of all these leads that they've received, all these types of SQLs, and they're going to drive them to close. And so together, this gives us a shared view across sales and marketing of the health of demand creation. And that's why it's so important to account for all these different situations, because it helps us understand all these different scenarios. Now, one of the things that we can layer on top of this are the different things that happen throughout the waterfall. There are essentially five different activities that happen throughout the waterfall, excuse me, that are important to driving throughput in this model. So at the highest level, we're going to seed demand, right? These are our reputation sorts of activities. We're going to be driving awareness, perception, preference for our offerings. But then we're going to also be doing the straight demand creation, so the tactics that are going to drive demand straight away. Well, that's not all we're doing. We're also going to be nurturing those leads that are coming through the waterfall. So we've got a steady drumbeat of communications from a nurture perspective. And then we also are going to get together, marketing is going to get together with sales. Maybe it's the field marketers that are going to get together with the folks in the field, and they're going to accelerate some of those pipeline deals. We're going to hold an event, a local event, or we're going to have some kind of dimensional mailer, something that's really going to move the pipeline along. And then the fifth activity is we're going to enable sales. So we might be coming up with playbooks, we might be doing education, we might be creating content on their behalf, that sort of thing. So keep these things in mind as we go through the four different use cases, because these are going to be, this is really foundational to how we think about everything in the waterfall. All right, so let's get into the use cases here a little bit. This is how we're going to frame the rest of the talk here. We're going to talk through these four use cases. So we're going to look at performance measurement, and this is really a matter of how, if the lead management process is operating in control. We're going to take a look at revenue forecasting. So you can use the waterfall to forecast revenue, not just from a pipeline perspective, but we're going to back that up a little bit further and use that to forecast the revenue that you've got for leads. We're also going to look at how you can use the waterfall from a demand planning perspective, and a lot of us are probably doing something similar to this, where you do reverse waterfall analysis and figure out how you're going to hit your goals. And then we're going to dive deep at the end into process diagnostics. So this is really, where do we have the bottlenecks in the waterfall? Where are the leads flowing through too freely? And how can we start to diagnose what's going on in there and do something about it? Okay, so this is the framework for the rest of the talk. One thing I want to share is that the three key metrics we see in terms of measuring the waterfall are volume, velocity, and conversion rates. And I had planned to explain this a little bit, but the good news is I've seen this up and down all day today. These are the three metrics I think MongoDB had these as their funnel KPIs is what they called them. So this is great. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of this. These are the different levers that we can use when things aren't going great in the waterfall to try and accelerate things. And we'll look at some examples of that in a little bit. So we've got our goofy cartoon character here. He's going to be our friend along the way. So when we get into this first area, performance measurement, we're really looking at, is the lead management process itself in control? Now, I've got a little bit of a background in dorky, lean, and Six Sigma process improvement. Is there anybody else out here who's got a little bit of a background in that at all? All right, my brothers and sisters, all right. So we're gonna use some concepts from Lean and Six Sigma when we look at this. It's not hardcore stuff. Your eyes will not glaze over, hopefully. But there are some concepts from that apply, okay? So one of the most important things you wanna get to when you're doing waterfall analysis is to understand that there isn't just one waterfall. So certainly if you are just in the process of putting in a lead management process, you're starting to apply maybe some of the full circle tools, you want to develop one aggregate waterfall. But for those of us who've dived into it a little bit deeper than that, we know that there are different types of waterfalls that we can look at. We can start to slice it in different ways. We can look at it by geography, as we have it broken out here. You can look at it by business unit, by product. So the important thing is to get to a place where you can look at different waterfalls, because you're going to see different conversion rates. You're going to see different volumes flowing through the different waterfalls. So first you have to define what those key waterfalls are. And really only you can do that. You understand what the big cuts are for your business. Is it geography? Is it the different business units? You can get into that. I know this is a little bit tough to read, but what you can do then is you can start to break down those waterfalls into an even finer grouping. You can look at how they break out in terms of the different campaigns that you're doing. Now, at Sirius, we talk about campaigns with a capital letter C. So campaigns are these big, overarching go-to-market approaches. They've got a theme. They're based on buyer need. They run for 12 months or longer. It's not a little tactic. It's not sending an email. That's not a campaign. These are the big, overarching approaches. So you can compare how your campaigns are doing. And you can see we've got those three metrics running down the side. We've got velocity, we've got volume, we've got conversion rates. We've also added in cost per lead. And you can also look at things not just on a campaign-by-campaign basis, but you can look at things that we refer to as out-of-campaign. These are things that will cut across some of the campaigns that you're doing. So this event, for example, for Full Circle, might be an out-of-campaign sort of thing. It's not part of a specific campaign they're doing. It's their yearly event. It's a great event. And it's going to have impact across all the different campaigns. Okay? The other important concept to look at when we're trying to measure the effectiveness of the process itself is to look closely at the SLAs. So these are the 5 SLAs that we recommend putting in place. Again, depending on your level of maturity and evolution in terms of implementing the waterfall, you may not have all 5 of these. But these essentially represent all those different handoffs that we saw in the waterfall. So the first one is that handoff from marketing to tele. Okay? We generated the leads. We've automation qualified them. We're going to give that to the tele team. The second one is the route arounds. These are the hot leads from marketing that we're going to send right to outside sales. So there's an SLA associated with that. There's a time frame expectation and a set of activities that are supposed to be executed in accordance with that SLA. The third one is the last one for the positive path forward. So this is tele to sales. Okay? So this completes all the different handoffs going in a forward motion. But you also want to account for the SLAs going back upstream. So when tele rejects it, back up to marketing. Or when sales rejects it, back up to tele, or all the way back up to marketing in the case of the route around leads that they received. You also want to account for SLAs that are going to happen in that scenario as well. Okay? So what we can do then, and this closes out this first section, is we can report on this. I forget if it was in a breakout session. I've had so many good sessions here today. If it was a breakout session or main stage, but somebody was talking about just the very act of reporting on this starts to drive compliance around these things. So in this example, what we're seeing is we're looking at the AQL to TAL conversion process. And so this is the process of the tele team receiving those AQLs and just checking them to make sure they meet with the agreed upon lead levels that we talked about with sales. And if they do, then we're going to accept them. And so we're looking at the timing here in terms of whether they're in compliance or not. In this example, we've got 48 hours to complete to accept the leads or to reject them. And so we can see, 81% of the leads are in compliance, 19% are not. And we've also got a further breakdown of what that looks like from a timing perspective, so we can start to dig into some of the root cause analysis. So these are the sorts of things that you can start to report on from an SLA perspective that'll give you insight into whether the process is performing the way it should. And these are, we find this is really a place where organizations really struggle in their reporting. It's relatively easy to talk about the number of leads that are flowing through or the conversion rates, but whether people are meeting the SLAs or not is a little bit harder. I could talk for another 45 minutes after this about the whole lead management process and how important it is to have an owner over this process, to have somebody with a hall monitor sash on who's going to be looking at whether things are in compliance and has the clout to be able to do something about it if things are out of compliance. That's another conversation, but that's part of this whole story as well. All right, so let's look at the second area. We're going to take a look at how you might use the waterfall for revenue forecasting. And this is a really interesting use of the waterfall. It's an area I don't see a lot of organizations doing it, but it can be really helpful. It can really facilitate the conversation with sales. Sales has this idea of how much revenue they're going to be able to bring in because they're doing pipeline forecasting. What about marketing? What's their contribution going to look at? So let's go to a concrete example. You can follow the math here along with me. It's a little late in the day to be doing math, but I'll do it for you so you don't have to do it. So one of the things we can do is we can say, all right, let's take a snapshot of the totals that we have in each of the different lead stages right now, okay? And it's not going to look like a normal funnel because we're taking a snapshot of wherever the leads are today. But what we can do then is we can apply our conversion rates to those leads to start to understand how they're going to work their way through the waterfall. So in this case, in that second column, the current conversion, what we're seeing is this is the conversion rate from that current lead stage to the next. And in that third column, net conversion to closed won, this is the overall conversion rate from that lead stage all the way to closed won. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that conversion rate and we're going to apply the average sale price to each of those leads. So first of all, if we look at the inquiry line, for example, we see that there are about, 6,200 leads that are sitting in the inquiry stage right now. If those converted at the rates that we've seen in the past, 0.3%, then we're going to end up with 19 closed deals from those 6,200 inquiries. Okay? And if we apply the average sale price of $140,000, then we can expect to see about $2.6 million in revenue from those inquiries as they're sitting right now. Okay? And we can do the same for all the other leads that are sitting in all the various stages, and we can add that all up, and we can see that from the various leads that we have sitting in our lead pipeline right now, we're expecting about $6 million in revenue. Is anybody doing this kind of revenue forecasting right now by looking at their leads? Okay, great. Now, I think the interesting part of this is not so much looking at the number total, but when we start to apply the idea of velocity. So it's great to know that in aggregate, here's the revenue that we're going to be expecting, but when is that revenue going to come in? So I've saved you the math on this part, but let's say that we've applied the velocity numbers to those leads. So we've got a good handle on how long it takes those leads to work their way all the way through to closed won. And we can see that in Q1 and Q3, things look good. The blue number is the goal, or the blue bar is the goal. The green number is what we're expecting. So we're ahead of what we're expecting, but Q2 doesn't look so hot. So this is great insight into how, what we're doing from a marketing perspective and how we're expecting the revenue to pan out over the next 3 quarters. And what we can do is we can start to adjust. So we can say, all right, well, we got to do some acceleration. We got to do some things to speed things up, to make things happen in Q2. Or we need to tighten up our service level agreements. We got to do better governance, better management of what's going on there. So the acceleration, that's kind of pulling on that velocity lever. The service level management, that's pulling on the efficiency and the conversion rates. So the idea is here you're getting great insight into what's going on, with your leads, what that means for future revenue, and then you can make adjustments so you can get out ahead of it. Most of us in B2B sales, we've got a long sales cycle, 3, 6, 9 months, whatever it might be. And so the marketing that you're doing today isn't going to have an effect until much later down the line. This is a way of quantifying that and being able to get out ahead of any issues. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at our third area, demand planning. And this is an area that I think, as I said, I think many of you may be doing already. This is the situation where you get handed a number, and then you got to run back to your desk and say, how am I going to hit my annual number? I just got a dollar revenue goal handed to me. Now I got to figure out what that marketing mix is going to look like. I got to figure out how much this is all going to cost me. How do I do that exactly? So here we're going to go with another concrete example. Let's say that in aggregate, marketing is or the company is looking to bring in $28 million. Marketing is getting signed up for, they're getting voluntold for about a quarter of that, so $7 million. And the CEO has said, okay, marketing, guess what? You've got a budget of $840,000 to make this happen. Go. So what do? Besides cry underneath your desk. Well, what you can do is you can apply the waterfall, but in reverse. Okay, so what we can do is we can say, all right, we've got a revenue goal of $7 million. What's our average selling price? We'll use the same example that we used before, $140,000 average selling price. So we divide one into the other. That means we need 50 closed deals by the end of the year. Okay, pretty simple math. Now what we can do is we can take our conversion rates, our historic conversion rates, and back that up to understand how many types of leads, what different lead stages we're going to need all the way back up into inquiries. So in this case, we start with the 50 closed won deals. That tells us we need about 278 SQLs, et cetera, all the way up. And the great news is all we need to do is produce 16,763 inquiries, and we're home free. Well, all right, that sounds good. Sounds like a big number, but let's see how that looks compared to our budget. So if we had a blended cost per inquiry of $60 per inquiry, times those roughly 17,000 inquiries we need to generate, that's going to cost us $1 million. What's our budget? $840,000. So Bonnie, when you give your head of marketing, when you tell Christine, you got $840,000 to go get this done, and she comes back and says, I think I need $1 million. What's your response? Better get some more financing. Yeah, better get some more financing, she said. Usually the response is figure it out. I don't have a secret bag of money under my desk. You got to figure it out. So now we got to turn back to the waterfall, and we say, okay, well, what kind of levers can we push and pull to make this happen? And in this case, we're going to focus on the conversion rates. We're going to say, well, maybe if we could tweak those conversion rates just a little bit, if we could squeeze a little bit more effectiveness and get a little bit more yield out of the waterfall, we could hit our number. So you can see the circled areas there in that second column. We've upped the conversion rates from what we originally estimated. So we're doing some sensitivity analysis. And if you do that, now we say, all right, we're going to start with those same 50 closed deals that we're going to close won deals that we'll need. We're going to back that up through the waterfall using our new conversion rates. And lo and behold, all we need now are 10,934 inquiries. Well, that's good. That's a lot fewer than we had before, right? And it should cost us less. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So what we can say is, all right, we'll apply the $60 on the roughly 11,000 inquiries that we have to generate. Great news. It's only going to cost us $650,000 or so in acquisition costs. The bad news, though, is we don't just get to play with the conversion rates and sort of hope everything turns out for the best. We had to do some things to make the lower part of the waterfall actually have better conversion rates. So we're going to put in some nurture programs. We're going to put in some enablement programs to make that happen. We're going to spend $175,000 in this case on making that happen. And that's okay because we're still working under a budget of $840,000, but now the total is only about $831,000. We got like $9,000 left over at the end of the year for a huge party when we make our number. So this is the sort of thing that you can use the waterfall for demand planning, whether it's beginning of the year and you're going through your annual planning process, if it's a quarterly revisit for the QBR, or if it's whenever it is, if you want to stop, drop, do everything and refigure things. This is a great way of looking at whether not only are you going to be able to hit your number as a sanity check, but how you might be able to tweak things a little bit to make it happen. Okay? All right, we're on to our last section here. We're going to talk a little bit about waterfall diagnostics, and this is a really interesting area of research that we've been working on. It has to do with looking at the waterfall in terms of patterns. and trying to figure out where the bottlenecks are, where we're letting leads through too quickly, and then how we might have a structured and methodical way of approaching those issues. So it wouldn't be a good SiriusDecisions presentation if we didn't have some sort of 2x2 grid, right? Research and advisory firm, we're going to have some kind of egghead 2x2 graph up there. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of different things. We're going to look at things from a data perspective, and we're going to look at things from a process perspective. And on both of those, we're going to compare the current state to what our goal is. So in the data, what we're going to do is we're going to look at our dashboards, and we're going to try to establish what kinds of patterns we're seeing in the waterfall. And then we're going to compare those to the benchmarks that we're seeing. But that's not the end of it. So then we're going to look at things from a process perspective, and we're going to say, all right, well, what's happening in terms of the process right now? Let's come up with a hypothesis for how we think, for why we think things are going off the rails, and then we'll compare that to best practices, and hopefully we'll get our ship back on track. Okay? So that's the overall approach. Now, benchmarks are a funny thing. There are a lot of factors that impact benchmarks. One of them is what we refer to as demand type. There are 3 different types of demand. One is an established market where somebody has been buying this product or service for a long time. It's almost a commodity. You might be competing on price. It's sort of a no-brainer that they want or need this sort of thing. The other is new paradigm. So again, they may have a budget line item for this, but you've built a better mousetrap. So you've got to convince them to switch from what they're currently using to use your new and improved product. And then there's a demand type called new concept. And this is where you're coming to market with something people haven't really even thought of before. And I heard from a couple of companies that are sort of on that track here today. And this is where you have to do a lot of evangelism. You have to do a lot of education in terms of what the offering is, why they should need it. And so that's going to affect the lead level. So the leads that marketing is going to be able to supply in that new concept scenario are not going to be as well qualified as an established market scenario. And that's also going to impact the benchmarks of what you can expect in terms of conversion rates for those different types of demand. Go-to-market approach is also another thing that impacts the benchmark. So if you're direct versus indirect, those conversion rates look very different. And then it also matters a lot what your peers are doing. You want to take a look at what like companies have for their conversion rates to be able to compare. It's not to say that's the goal, that's the North Star, but it's another data point to understand, okay, well, here's what our competition is doing. If we're way below that, maybe that's something to aspire to, or we want to outperform them, we want to do even better than that. So let's take a look at the patterns. Now, one of the fundamental pieces of looking at things from this perspective is we're going to take the waterfall that we reviewed earlier, and we're going to tip it on its side. If you think about the demand waterfall as it exists right now, it's really a series of lead stages. That's kind of how it's represented. It's sort of stopping points of where leads are throughout the process. It's almost statuses. But we can also think of the waterfall as a series of processes, of things that we do. And when you break down the waterfall, it basically boils down to 4 big processes. You can certainly break these down, decompose these into smaller things. But essentially the 4 big processes are, we're going to evaluate the inquiry that's come in. Okay, so this is where our lead scoring comes in. We're going to pass that to Tele. The Tele team is going to do some form of qualification. The outside sales team is going to do another level of qualification, and then they're going to close the deal. Okay, they're going to work that opportunity and close it. So these are the 4 big processes that we're going to use when we start to establish the waterfall patterns. So we've got our goofy-looking cartoon friend here back. He looks confused. So let me explain a little bit about the terminology in terms of how we're going to represent the patterns. So let's say we've got a benchmark of 41%. And by the way, this is not, what do we have here? Inquiry to AQL is not 41% is not meant to be the SiriusDecisions blessed approved conversion rate for what that's supposed to look like. It's just an example. But if we draw the line there, what we can say is, okay, if we're a little bit above that conversion rate, we're going to call that lowercase a. Okay, it's better, but it's not that much better. And we're using a plus or minus 10% tolerance range here. If it's a lot better, we're going to characterize that as a capital letter A. Same thing on the flip side. A little bit below is a lowercase b. A lot below is a capital B. Okay? So this is the terminology we're going to use when we start to look at the patterns. And what we can do is we can lay these things out. Now, we're going to take these 4 main processes, and we're going to characterize them as A or B, capital letter or lowercase. It's almost like a, what's the old personality I'm trying to think of? The Myers-Briggs, right. Are you an INTJ? Are you an ESPF? Whatever you are. So we can use these to try and identify patterns, and this is going to shortcut us to figuring out what's going on with the waterfall. So let's take a look at a hard example here, because I think this will help bring it to life a little bit. There's a lot of information here on this slide. I'll walk you through it. So if we start up here at the top, we can see that what we have represented is the overall conversion rate. Now this is inquiry all the way down to closed won. So it's this big macro conversion rate that we're looking at. The goal is what's on the right. So 0.65% is our goal for the overall conversion rate. But how we're performing is on the left, 0.38%. So that's way below. So we're going to give that a capital letter B. All right? So we've got issues. We should be performing at a higher level of conversion than we are. Well, as we start to break that down, we look at the next layer down and say, okay, well, what's going on? We're going to look at the inquiry to TQL conversion rate and then TQL to closed won. Okay? And now we're starting to see some stratification. Now we've got problems upstream. We've got a big capital letter B. But downstream, things aren't so bad. We've got a lowercase a. That's good. We're a little bit above the conversion rate and not too far above. So that's good. Now if we break things down further, we can really start to see how things break out. So now we've got a capital letter A for the inquiry to AQL process. This is the automation qualification process. But the telequal process seems messed up, right? We've got a capital letter B. Bad things are happening in there. And then, once again, we've got smooth sailing. We've got 2 lowercase a's. So from there, we're actually above the conversion rates, and things are going pretty well. So this concludes the data portion and the pattern recognition portion of our approach. The danger here is that we get into a data Rorschach test, where everybody is interpreting what this means differently, you know? Some people look at this and they'll say, oh, I see a butterfly. Somebody else will say, oh, I see 2 old ladies fighting. Somebody else will say, I see ennui. And then you say, who invited the French guy? So everybody can have a different interpretation of this. So it's really important that we stick to the numbers and we start to hypothesize about what the problem could be and start to dig into that. Now, one thing I will say, as you're looking at these patterns, the way it's defined, a B is always a problem. Okay? You're below your conversion rate. That's bad. Lowercase b, capital B, it's always bad. A isn't always necessarily good. Okay? If marketing way upstream is way above their conversion rate, they might just be generating a ton of junk. Or somewhere in the middle, somebody might just be kicking the can down the road, right? And they're not filtering out those bad leads that are coming through. So A's can be good or bad. B's are always bad. All right, so now here we're going to get into the hypothesis part of things. And we're going to start coming up with theories as to why things are bad. And we're going to have a structured approach to how we do this. So we're going to look at things from, this is where some of the process improvements, some of the Lean Six Sigma will come back in. We're going to think about the process itself, but we're also going to think about the inputs and the outputs that happen before and afterwards. So we're going to form our hypotheses around those 3 main areas. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So we're back to our example. We just stepped through this, this example, and we say, okay, here's what our pattern looks like. We've got A, B, A, A. So we think there's a problem in the telequal space. So let's come up with some hypotheses around what's going on. What could be the problem? Well, on the input side of things, maybe marketing's sending us a bunch of junk. Lead scoring's broken. They're just sending us leads that don't meet the criteria that we agreed to. Of the process of qualifying those leads, there could be a number of things that are problematic there, too. Maybe the telereps don't know how to do their job. Maybe they'd like to, but they haven't been educated on how to do it, so there's a training problem. Maybe the SLA process is broken. We thought we put it in place. Last year, we launched this great lead to revenue process. We just assumed everybody knew how to do it, but there's a problem with it. We're not monitoring it. Maybe there's a problem with that process. And then on the output side, maybe the reps don't understand what a TQL is supposed to look like, and so they're not qualifying the lead to those standards. All right, so there are a bunch of different hypotheses that we can come up with. And what we'll do is we'll drill into one of these. So we'll say, all right, let's say there's something wrong with the service level agreements. Those are broken. And you can take this and you can get even more granular about it. So you can start to ask more questions about why the SLA process might be broken. You can say, well, maybe we don't have consensus on what the lead definitions are. Or maybe the SLAs aren't being enforced. And so you can go so far as to score yourself, on a scale of 1 to 5, to really start to dig into what the root cause analysis could be. Now, sometimes, even as you start to dig into the qualitative hypotheses, sometimes you have to go back and find more data. You've got what you think is the problem, but now you've got to go find more supporting data to prove out what you thought was the issue. And so in this example here, we've gone back and we're looking at what's going on in that telequalification step, and we're looking at things around activity and also quality. So you can see, for example, we're expecting the average number of attempts, touch attempts in this step to be 8. But what do we have? 1.4. So we're way below. The telereps are way below what they should be doing. We can also look at things from a quality perspective. So percentage of calls with live interaction, for example, it's only 8%. That's pretty low. That's bad. So now we've uncovered some of the data that has helped prove out our hypothesis. So now, once again, just like we've done with all the other steps, now we've got to take some kind of action. So we're going to pull on our levers again. So if we think there's something broken about the SLA process, we can address it from a governance perspective. We can revisit the teleservices team. Maybe there's some training that has to go on. Maybe the tele team just never really adopted our lead to revenue, concepts. Maybe they thought, it's the initiative du jour, who cares? We'll just kind of keep our head down, it'll go away after a while. So there might be a bigger cultural change that you'd have to try and enact. Okay? So that's the last of our waterfall use cases. We stepped through a number of different ways that the waterfall can be applied to help you bring visibility and transparency into what's going on so that you can further accelerate what's going on in your sales and marketing efforts. So some action items. For those of you that are in marketing, it's on you to bring this visibility and this transparency to the fore. Bonnie and I recently did a webcast together, and one of the things that came out of that is, especially with the full circle technology and other tools that are out there, there's no longer any excuse not to get a window into what's happening inside that black box. The tools are there, the ability is there, the blueprints are there in terms of how to look at this stuff. It's on marketing to reveal this transparency, as ugly as it first seems, and then to start to fix what's going on. For sales, the main point for you is to get involved in this stuff. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with clients when we first start to engage with them, and some conversations I heard here today, where the whole lead management process and the idea of SLAs is something that marketing went down in the basement and figured out, and then ran back upstairs and tried to foist on sales and say, hey, we're gonna live by these rules, right? Can't happen that way. It's got to be a joint agreement between marketing and sales. So sales, take the initiative to get involved, be part of the process. And for product, for those of you who may be product managers or wear a little bit of a product hat, use things like those different waterfall slices that we saw to understand how your product or your offering or your solution is doing. Cut it a couple of different ways. Look at geography, look at industry. There's a lot about the waterfall that can help you understand how your product set is doing. Okay? So I think like the last presentation, we've got a little bit of time here left for some Q&A. I know there was a lot of material. I went through it pretty quickly. So I'd love to take any questions that you might have in the few minutes we have left. And if not, I'll go practice my judo moves out in the hall, so I'll be ready for the Duke-Carolina battle. Yeah.
Okay. When you're looking at evaluating campaign performance, one of your slides was showing the inquiries that came in. What's the time frame on those? Last 3 months, last 6 months? And then also you did the MI to win, but actually the win is, it's typically the contact or leads are touched by lots of campaigns, not just that one.
Yep.
So how do you, what's the rationale you think through to put those numbers down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's because kind of fuzzy.
Yeah. So one of the ways you can do, and I, it was on the slide, but I didn't talk to it, is to think of things in terms of a cohort analysis. So Alex talked about that when he was up on stage. So whether that means grouping things by campaign, if that's what makes sense to you, or you're grabbing all the leads that were created in April, and now you're going to track those as they go through, the cohort that makes sense to you is how you should track things. Because you're right, there are a lot of different influences that happen. And even as much as we might say, all right, we're going to target this audience for this campaign, and these are the tactics we're going to apply to them, they may be influenced by some other brand things that happen. So you can take that into account by looking more closely at the cohorts.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
All of this seems to be based on a direct sales model.
Yep.
When you get a channel involved, sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of understand those metrics and how the channel is dealing with them, if you're giving leads, especially to the channel.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how to manage that?
Yeah. Yeah. When the channel's involved, it means you've got one or more black boxes that have just entered the picture. It's tough. The channel's tough. But all these concepts still apply. The idea of conversion rates and velocity and volume and all that sort of thing. The trick of it is you don't have the visibility that you have with a direct sales model. So what I've seen some other organizations do is they'll have some of their channel partners will work in their Salesforce automation system or in their marketing automation platform so that now all the numbers are gathered together. We had somebody at Summit a couple of years ago who had addressed that channel partnership and trying to get that data out of them. And I think they had actually set up some incentives with that partner. I won't say they were paying them for that data, but it was something akin to that where they were, they wanted that data so they could do that analysis. They wanted to be able to compare partners. And it does kind of go into a black hole, right? You send them these leads, they're doing something with it, and maybe you get some deal registrations back. So it's all about working with the partners to try and get a hold of that data or potentially putting them on your platform, if that's an option. Okay. Yeah.
But each of your steps had something about a qualification process. What I didn't see shown here, or if you could comment on it, is the role of lead nurturing and how it impacts how qualified someone is at a certain time.
Yep.
And then how that's layered into the qualification measurements.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of what I talked about was looking at this as a throughput process, right? It's sort of, we start off with a lot at the top, we've got some yield at the bottom. When we looked at the 5 job families that are involved, sales and marketing, nurture is absolutely one of them. So that's one of the levers that you can press to try and either accelerate things that are in the pipeline or establish a steady drumbeat of communications and potentially offers later in the game to help push on one of those levers to try and make things go faster, potentially up the deal size as well, that sort of thing. So that's one of the, I'll say tactics, not to confuse it with an outbound tactics, but that's one of the things that you can do to try and push some of those key metrics. Okay. Anything else? Everybody's thirsty, I think. Okay, great. Thanks very much.